Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Megan Van Pelt, and I actually have with me today Jaytuk Steinruck as well as Rosa Laucci. Both work for Tolowa Nation with myself. So we did the Traditional Ecological Knowledge project, and as many of you know, this is the first time that Indigenous Traditional Knowledge has been gathered for the MPA baseline project. So it's sort of a unique project compared to what information was gathered throughout the state. This project was led by 4 tribes. So Tolowa Nation was the lead on the project. The Shray Heights Indian community of the Trinidad Rancheria was a co-lead. The Wiyot tribe was the co-lead, and then the Intertribal Sinkyone Wilderness Council. And the Intertribal Sinkyone Wilderness Council is actually a consortium of 10 federally recognized tribes from southern Humboldt and Mendocino and Lake counties. So in all, really, we had 13 federally recognized tribes involved in the project. Each tribe had a individual PI identified, so I'd like to recognize Tom Torma, who I believe is in the audience here for the Wiyot tribe. I'm not sure if Rachel Stenberg is still here, but she was the lead for Trinidad Rancheria. And then we had Hawk Rosales for the Sinkyone Council as the lead, and then I was the lead for Tolowa Nation. But then we also had lots of other folks involved actually doing the research. So both Jaytuk and Rosa took a lead on the research for Tolowa. We had Ted Hernandez for taking the lead for the Wiyot tribe on research. Both Rachel and Jennifer Ben and Saber Comet were involved in the research for Trinidad. And then there were 8 different people actually for Sinkyone doing interviews. So 8 of their 10-member tribes did interviews, and so they had an individual from each tribe actually doing the interviews for them. And then myself and Jerry Rohde assisted with some of the other research for Sinkyone. So our project is a baseline characterization project. And so there is information captured about the current baseline, but what's sort of unique about our project is also the fact that we gathered a lot of historic information. So it can help speak to sort of the shifting baseline concept. So it sort of gives more context to the current baseline. We were focused on nearshore marine habitats. So we picked species that were in the rocky intertidal, soft bottom intertidal and beach, kelp and shallow rock, and then we ended up capturing information about offshore rocks as well, although I know that's not one of the identified habitats by the state. We also gathered information about how tribal citizens are interacting with and managing the selected keystone species within those habitats, so looking at consumptive and non-consumptive uses. We also interviewed tribal citizens about areas of concern that they may have, because there was a lot of talk during the MLPA process that people were concerned about particular gathering areas. And so we wanted to allow them an opportunity to identify those areas concerned and then identify threats that they perceived were impacting those areas. We also gathered information about perceptions of the process itself, the MLPA process, and potential impacts from designated MPAs. And some of those questions were similar to those that were asked in the socioeconomic study of recreational and commercial fishermen. Another piece to our project that is unique is we came up with policy and management recommendations. So our project is, in its nature, has some political nature to it, right? So it is sort of unique in that as well. And so we really thought this was a really good opportunity to provide a space for tribal citizens to really directly inform policy. And then of course we came up with some long-term monitoring recommendations. So just a quick overview. So we selected 5 keystone species. And we went through a very rigorous process to identify those 5 species. I think we took over a year before the project even started. And what we did is we found species that were both ecologically important and culturally important, and sort of where that overlap was. Those are the 5 species we came up with. So abalone, and we ended up throughout the research identifying 4 specific abalone species. Clams. There were 12 specific species identified. Mussels, there were 2. Seaweeds, which we also included as a kelp, there were 6. And then 2 smelt species. So what we ended up doing, our project was 2-part. We did archival research, and then we did tribal citizen interviews. And so the really important part about this was that each of the project partner tribes were provided the space to actually do the interviews themselves and do the archival information themselves. And then we just created a standardized way in which that information was gathered, and then a standardized way in which that information was analyzed. So there was consistency across the region, but it was really important to ensure that each tribe could collect the information themselves. And we did a lot, there was a lot of concern over confidentiality of sensitive information. And so this provided a space for the tribe to sort of aggregate that data at a tribal level, and then we could aggregate that data on a North Coast level, and that would be the information that we would present. We also had contracted with EcoTrust, who was 0.97 for a moment during our project, and they actually developed a data survey tool for us. And so that was on tablets, and there was aspatial questions and spatial questions. And it's very similar to what they did for the socioeconomic study. So as people were being interviewed, they were allowed to identify 1 by 1 mile squares of where they were talking about a particular activity or concern. And so that had its drawbacks and positives to using that tool. So just looking at archival research, so this is just very kind of high level things that we're sharing today. So there's a lot behind all of this, but just to give you kind of an idea, so across the 4 project partners, there was 120 sources that information was pulled from. So just those 5 species were looked for within those. And so 120 sources came up. So those could be archival, published materials, grade literature, maybe reports that tribes had in-house, or maybe even previous interviews that tribes had done. Then we developed a relational database schema that had the potential to link to GIS. And the relationships there was starting with place, then going to the relationship with the resource, then the activity, and then within that you can attach media sources, so the published information is the PDF itself, if there was any associated pictures, audio, video, all of that. And then of course the citation or the source. And so that's been a pretty amazing centralized sort of database for us now, where you can query and really kind of interact with the data. That's really going to be really beneficial to us in all types of work into the future. And the idea with the database is it can link to GIS. When we all had to go through our revising our budgets and stuff, you all recall, we all kind of had to cut things back. And so that's one of the things that was actually eliminated was georeferencing all the archival information. But that ability to do that in the database is still there, and actually Taloa was able to go that next step and georeference all the place names and the archival information. So this just kind of gives you an idea. Overall, there were 208 different places documented for just these 5 species. So that's pretty amazing when you think of that we're only looking at 5 species and so many more are used. And then of course the 120 sources that I mentioned. So just a couple kind of interesting things, I think. Throughout the MLPA process, as you all remember, there was a lot of tribal engagement, really speaking to the fact that tribal uses in the ocean are not recreational or commercial, right? That those are the 2 sort of regulatory boxes in which the state uses to define use. And so we kind of just sort of pulled from the archival to kind of see if those terms were used at all. And so we only found 2 references that really speak to sort of this indirect recreational use. So it was in regards to Taloa and Wea women using discs that were made from mussel shells for a dice-like game. So very indirectly, speaking about recreational use in terms of relating to the ocean. Commercial use was never explicitly mentioned in archival materials whatsoever. But of course, trading and bartering, there were many examples to that, particularly between coastal and inland tribes, trading south to north, and then also even trading locations to gather. So there was a couple instances where one tribe would allow, or not a tribe, but a village, would allow another to gather at a particular spot, and then they would allow them to gather in another area for different resources. So I wanted to allow these guys to sort of give just a couple excerpts that sort of kind of resonated with them, that kind of show some of the information that we captured.
Hello. Yeah, Jaytuk and I did a lot of archival research. We went down to the Bancroft Library in Berkeley and spent a couple days there digging through field notes and all that kind of stuff, and brought a ton of things back that we then had to paw through to look for these 5 species. So it was a very, very tedious process, but also very, very interesting. I think probably one of my favorite things that I found relates to a lot of the stuff that we're doing now. We do a lot of marine biotoxin monitoring. We go out every month and we get mussels and we send them into the Department of Public Health. And one of the excerpts that I found was from an early 1930s source, and it was talking about how when the Indian people would see the water glowing, the bioluminescence in the water from an algal bloom, they would know not to eat the mussels because they thought that bioluminescence or that brightness would burn the mussels. So it was kind of your first like biotoxin monitoring right there. I just always thought that was just a really super, super cool thing. Yeah, that was kind of my favorite thing. So, and Tuck has some stuff too.
All right. Delahunt, Shuhushi, Jaytuk Steinruck. Yeah, along with, to add to what Rosa had to say, we went to Bancroft, and we also went to Humboldt State in the Humboldt room and did research there. And then what we just had in our own tribal archives. But I'd like to just kind of read this little excerpt from, it's on the actual surf smell. While each wave may bring only a few fish, or at best a pound or 2 of them, he may stay on until he finally staggers back at the beach with 20 or 30 or even 50 wiggling pounds massed in the cone of his net. The smelt were in former times so numerous that a man often got his net so full that he had to have help to carry it ashore, sometimes even so full that it was necessary to pour some of the fish back into the water for fear of tearing the net because of the weight of the fish. We thus see that all along the immediate shoreline, wherever it was sandy, surf fishing with a V-shaped net or A-frame net was a common practice. In fact, when the smaller species ran into spawn, surf fishing was the major occupation of the people dwelling on the coast. So much so, in fact, that they moved down directly onto the beaches and camped there for the purpose, and were joined by relatives and friends from inland, even those of other speech and tribe. And I just wanted to share that because we continue, my family in particular, and another family up north, continues that tradition to this day. We still camp every summer on the beach for these fish. So I just wanted to, share that with you guys, and it's something that I find important, and I still, to this day, try to find the smell.
Yeah, a little harder. Okay, thanks. So just turning over, 4 minutes left. Oh, dang, you better hurry up. Okay. So just looking at the interviews now. So we gathered interviews from 69 interviewees. We had set a 60-person target, so we exceeded that. Telewadeni Nation by far did the most interviews at 26, and then Sinkion Council had 23, Trinidad Rancheria and we out 10 apiece. The age range was 32 to 91 years old with an average age of 60. We had I think it was about 56 or 58% of the respondents were men. We tried to get a somewhat even involvement from men and women just because there are gender differences and what you're sort of allowed to do. And then here's sort of a breakdown of where people were actually enrolled members. So just here's a snapshot of resource use. So again, this aggregates all the individual's information. And I think this is just very striking because again, in the MLPA process, many tribal citizens came forth and said, we use the whole coast. And people would say, yeah, sure. Well, just looking again at only 5 species, you see pretty much the entire coastline is being used to harvest or for some other purpose. And you'll see there is sort of a gap in here. And really that's the only area where we didn't have a tribal group represented in our study. So it also sort of underscores the importance of sort of staying within the area that you sort of have ownership, responsibility, and are tied to, have that family or village connection. So interviews that harvest the 5 keystone species. By far the largest was Smelt at 91%, and the least was abalone at 52%, which of course is really tied to sort of availability. So, okay, another thing that we really kind of learned from this is regarding stewardship practices. So there were some overarching themes across all of the tribes that can be summarized in just a couple bullet points. So live in a good way and give thanks or prayer. Don't take more than you need and can care for, so don't waste. The importance of the interconnectivity and interreliance of everything. So you have really a responsibility to more than yourself. So your responsibility both to your community and to the natural environment as well, as a part of it. Abide by teachings that are passed down through the generations, which really create those protocols in law. And we learned a lot about different laws and then protocol specific to species and then also specific to place. Manage in a way that ensures species health and abundance and sustains tribal citizens, so maintaining that balance and the importance of balance. And there was also many examples, and even in the excerpt Jaytuk just shared, about different management techniques. So spatial techniques, temporal, seasonal. There was lots of different gear type, different ways that people were actively managing the resource based on these different techniques. So real quickly, I know we don't have a lot of time, but if there's another excerpt.
Sure. There were kind of top 3 species that we heard a lot about and that are still harvested today, and that was clams and seaweed and smelt. And the seaweed stewardship practices were pretty extensive and repeated over and over again. One was to never cut it with a knife. It wouldn't grow back. You had to pick it by hand. Don't pick it all from one spot. Leave some on the rock so that it'll grow back. Don't pick where there are short blades because someone already harvested there. And pick in different patches because they get picked twice a year. So you don't want to harvest everything from one rock. Kind of pick where you go. So you're leaving some, for the propagation of the following year. So those came up time and time again, and it was just kind of a cool thing to see. So.
Okay, and then real quick on areas of concern and perceived threats. So we did a heat map with this, but the top 3 things that people were really concerned about were overfishing, water pollution, and water temperature. And I think the water temperature one is particularly interesting, that people are really kind of seeing changes from that. And then just looking at participation and perceptions of the MLPA process and the outcomes. So a majority of our interviewees didn't participate in the process at all. And so it really kind of shows you the disconnect, I think, between some of the users that are most actively out there and sort of statewide processes, and how, often, even though there might be lots of opportunities for public engagement, you're not necessarily going to reach the communities that are the most affected. 66% are either neutral or dissatisfied or strongly dissatisfied with the inclusion of local input. 96% are either neutral, dissatisfied, or strongly dissatisfied with the state license requirement for tribal take, which is not surprising. And one thing I think that was really great to see is that 88% of people would purchase a tribal license if the tribe issued them. So there was a lot of comments about, yeah, I'm not going to buy a state license, whatever, but if the tribe did it to understand the health of the resource, I'd be all in. So I think that really supports sort of the concept that tribes have been trying to push for co-management for some time. And then 8 of the MPAs were identified as directly impacting tribal harvest in various ways. And so that can be looked at a little bit further in the future, I think. So again, we made several policy management long-term monitoring recommendations that'll be in our final report. Tons of lessons learned that we just don't have time to share, but unless you want to add a couple things, you okay?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. What I find interesting overall with the project that we did and looking at the data that we collected and the interviews that we conducted was the tablet was good for getting data collected, but as for getting more information that you wanted at the individual, it was kind of hard because we were dealing with elderly people, and then they have to take time to go through a tablet, and they're like, what is this thing? So it kind of took away from the original, just getting the organic information out of them. That's what I found out when we did our interviews. And also, I wanted to add that, overall, not just my tribe, the Tallawadini Nation, but overall, smelt was a major concern for all of the North Coast tribes. And particularly in our MPA, in our area, that's along the coastline, Pyramid MPA, that smelt is not protected in that MPA. It's the only species in that MPA that everybody can fish recreationally. And I just find that very interesting that listening to everybody else's presentations, on seabirds and all this other stuff, and even the perch eating the smelt eggs, it's a major component to everything, and it's not being protected. So.
Okay, I think maybe just a couple last little things to sort of hit is just the value of this information and what it can mean to informing not only the MPA baseline, but tribal and state management as a whole. This project has been a really great opportunity to build the capacity of the tribes. This information is now being utilized in lots of different ways. Just at Tallawadini Nation, we're developing a harvest code based on traditional knowledge. We're doing marine planning. Lots of things have sort of come from this project. So it's really kind of been, although all the heartburn we had over the MLPA process, it's really been a catalyst for some really great things. So we really look forward to sort of the opportunities in the future to continue to build the marine program and work with the state in management. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.